Piali no chime, nano toca Gabriela Rios. Hi everyone, my name is Gabriela. I'm an assistant professor of writing and rhetoric at the University of Central Florida, and today I'm going to be reading from Ana Castillo's banned book, So Far From God, in solidarity with the folks over in Tucson, Arizona. This is a book about women, Chicana women, who struggle sort of with identities across borders and across cultures, living in what we sort of call the borderlands, and it's specifically in New Mexico. And I've chosen this section because it starts with the land and it talks about stories that emerge from the land and that emerge out of our relationship, our shifting relationship to our land bases. So I'll start here. The land was old and the stories were older. Just like a country changed its name, so did the names of their legends change. Once, La Llorona may have been Matlasihuatl, the goddess of the Mexica who was said to prey upon men like a vampire. Or she might have been Sihuapipiltin, the goddess in flowing robes who stole babies from their cradles and left in their place an obsidian blade. Or Sihuacoatl, the patron of women who died in childbirth, who all wailed and wept and moaned in the night air. These women descended on earth in certain days which were dedicated to them to appear at crossroads, and they were fatal to children. Her mother's mother had been from Old Mexico, and Sophie knew little about the antiquity of this tale, but mostly she just knew that her father had told her that La Llorona was a bad woman who had left her husband and home, drowned her babies to run off and have a sinful life, and God punished her for eternity, and she refused to repeat this nightmare to her daughters. Sophia had not left her children, much less drowned them to run off with nobody. On the contrary, she had been left to raise them by herself. And all her life, there had always been at least one woman around her, left alone, abandoned, divorced, or widowed to raise her children, and none of them had ever tried to kill their babies. Sure, she did hear of something like that once, in the newspaper, or maybe it was on the radio, and not to make any excuse for such a woman. The mother was only human, and anyone is capable at some point, when pushed into a corner like a rat, to devour her babies in order to save them, so to speak. Sophia didn't like to think of these things, and that's why she didn't want to think of La Llorona. But that was that. How was it that La Loca had heard of her? She has been coming to see me once since I was little, Mom, Loca said, as if in response to Sophia's thoughts. And she told me today that Esperanza has died. She wanted you to know. Esperanza wants you to know. Then, as if a baseball bat had just struck her across the back and taken the wind out of her, Sophie stumbled over to the couch and fell on it. Fed tried to revive her mother, and just held her until she came to, and when she did, it hit Fed too, that her sister was dead, and all three women began to wail and moan, like Sihuacoatl's, holding each other, and grieving over the loss of Sophie's oldest child. So some time passed, months in fact, understandably, before Fed gave the news that she had come over with that afternoon, which was that she thought she was in love again, and was fairly certain that setting a wedding date was not off for her and her cousin, Casey. In the meantime, having moved out on her own and knowing how now that soon she would have her own home and she hoped her own familia, it would have dawned on her with regards to cooking. She did not know so much as how to boil a pot of chicos. Even if Loca was not someone she would, for any other reason, go to for instruction about nothing, it was Loca whom she had gone to see that afternoon specifically, to ask her for cooking classes. But all of this, as I said, was postponed, indeed, nearly forgotten after Esperanza's family got the message she had sent them, Viva la Llorona, Chicana International Astral Traveler. But who better but La Llorona could see the spirit of Esperanza have found, come to think of it, if not a woman who had been given a bad rap by every generation of her people since the beginning of time. And yet, to Esperanza's spirit mind, La Llorona in the beginning, before men got in the way of it all, may have been nothing short of a loving mother goddess. So it was she whom Esperanza sent to deliver the news to her dear mother in Tome, knowing by then that La Llorona was on a first-name basis with her little sister, who had always hung out by the acequia. And everyone knows, if you want to find La Llorona, go hang out by the rio or its nearest equivalent, especially when no one else is around, at night. Which was where, after that, Esperanza was also occasionally seen. Yes, seen, not only by La Loca, but also by Domingo, who saw her from the front window, although he didn't dare go out and call to his transparent daughter. The first time he saw Esperanza down by the acequia conversing with Loca and another equally dubious figure in a long white dress, his fingers, holding the Venetian blinds apart at eye level, froze, and Sophie found him half an hour later, as still as a statue in that position, and dry-mouthed. Sophie also saw Esperanza down there, and once, although she had thought at first it was a dream, Esperanza came and lay down next to her mother, cuddled up as she had when she was a little girl, and had had a nightmare and went to be near her mother for comfort. And of course, La Caridad over in the trailer complex in the South Valley by then was having long discussions, even if mostly one-sided, with Esperanza about the war, about the president's misguided policies, about how the public was being fooled about a lot of the things that were going on behind that whole war business, and how people could get some results by taking such measures as refusing to pay taxes. But Caridad really didn't understand politics, and she had a hard time following her sister. So Caridad usually just nodded her head so as not to offend Esperanza by acting as if she didn't care. They talked while Caridad meditated in her room. Doña Felicia from the doorway only saw Caridad's lips move occasionally while her eyes fixed on a jar of water. "Why doesn't your sister come talk to me?" Doña Felicia asked Caridad one morning over breakfast. "What a know-it-all, that sister of yours, and still is. Dios sabrá how much I could tell her about the wars and injustices I witnessed." Not only did Caridad have a certain don, a faculty as a vaso, or as they call her in Santa Fe, a channeler, but La Loca too, and no one could argue this, had some natural gifts as well that were nearly as impressive. For instance, who had taught her to train a horse? Granted, there did appear to be an intuitive connection between La Loca and all animals, but still, none of the other women in her family, not even her mother, rode as well as Loca did. And who the heck had taught her to play fiddle? Then there were the things she knew about women's bodies. She had never delivered a human baby, but she knew all about women's pregnancy cycle. There wasn't even a medical book around for Loca to have learned from the pictures, since she didn't read very well and didn't like to. And it was she who took charge back in the days when Caridad had her untimely pregnancies. Among other domestic talents that Loca cultivated, such as embroidery, coming out was the most beautiful pillowcases and ruanas and Christmas presents. Loca had become a 100% manita cook. Well, she not only did the kitchen stuff, but all of it. Since she was a child, she was the one who helped her mother slaughter a pig for matanza, skin it, disembowel it, and roast it outdoors. She was also the one who helped her mother at the end of every summer with the canning. Together they jarred corn, chiles, peaches, currants, squash, and tomatoes and put them to boil in a big pot on a wood-burning stove. Sophie's mother had left outside many years before just for that purpose, since it would get so hot. Since Loca did not go to school and did not have to do homework or get up in the morning, ironing pleats into uniforms and looking for a clean white blouse and a pair of socks that matched like her sisters had to, she worked hard until sunset with her mother and slept in the mornings. Above all, Loca knew how to cook. She was, in fact, a better cook than her own mom, even though she learned most of what she knew from Sophie, who had learned what she knew from her own mother, and so on. Every now and then it happens that a child actually surpasses the knowledge and knack for doing some things that a parent has shown her, and this was the case with Loca. You've got to give credit where credit is due, and Fe eventually did take culinary instructions from her otherwise antisocial and perpetually held up for scrutiny kid sister. Here are 3 of La Loca's favorite recipes just to whet your appetite. If you want to be a good cook, Loca started out in a solemn tone with her sister, who Loca was sure must have found it pretty hard not only to admit that she didn't know how to do everything perfectly, but furthermore, Loca could at least do one thing even better than her. You have to first learn to be patient. Loca believed in doing things from scratch. Most meals contained corn, so it was necessary first to prepare the nistal by boiling in lime water until the skin peeled off. Then it was washed 2 or 3 times. If you wanted to be an especially meticulous preparer of corn, you would follow with the ever-so-tedious task of despicando, the little black off the corn with the penknife, so that if you were going to make tamales, they would come out nice and white and smooth. Since Loca had nothing but time on her hands, once she took care of the animals. She often did this, for which she eventually won the reputation at Christmas time of making the best tamales throughout Valencia County. And above all, everyone loved her blue corn tamales, which took even more work since that corn required grinding on a stone metate. Now, another big secret to our cooking is the chili sauce naturally. Loca told her sister the next time Santa Fe came to take a lesson. Loca had actually kind of taken a bit of an attitude with these cooking classes, and Fe wasn't sure if she cared all for that dash or two of cockiness that Loca was blending in with her teaching. The best, or at least the tastier chili sauce, was made from whole dried pepper, not from the chili powder, although a second alternative was pretty good and a lot faster, especially if a person didn't have time or the patience to make it from scratch. After carefully selecting your chiles, since Sofia grew her own, Loca had the advantage of being able to do this and not have to worry about going to the market for her chiles. You removed the stems and the seeds and scraped off the veins. Next, you crumbled them in a puela, any good iron skillet, and covered them with water. You let them soak for a few minutes and then worked them with your hands until all the meaty pulp was dissolved. Next, you strained it through a colander and poured it into a bigger puela containing pork lard, a little flour slightly browned, a cup of meat stock, a grated garlic, salt, and just a pinch of dry oregano. Now you were ready to make la loca Santa Carne adobada. For 2 days, you would soak pork meat in the above sauce, only you would put a little more garlic in it. A lot more garlic in it. And on the 3rd day, you cut up the meat in small pieces and would fry it. Another dish that was a must to learn for Fe, especially after she found out that it was Casimiro's favorite meal, was pozole. First, she was told by La Loca she must prepare the corn as she had been taught to make nistal for tamales, but she should not grind it. For every pound of stew pork, 1 cup of the whole nistal corn was boiled until half done. And then the meat was added and enough water to cover everything. Then you just let it cook until tender. Meanwhile, you added salt, chopped onion, and 2 whole red chiles, with the stems and seeds removed, of course, Fe. Then one afternoon, the 2 sisters and mother made a batch of bizcochitos, which are really customary, mostly at Christmas, but are also a delight at weddings and other types of fiestas. Bizcochitos are Spanish cookies or Mexican cookies, depending on who you talk to. Doña Felicia, for instance, would tell you they were dreamt up by Mexican nuns to please some church official like Mole. Sophia, on the other hand, was told by her grandmother that the recipe came from Spain. In any case, they are made from a rich pie pastry dough to which you add baking powder, sugar to sweeten, and here's the trick, there's always a trick, you know, a bit of clean anise seed. Next, you roll it out on the board about 1/3 of an inch thick. Loca would not say 1/3 of an inch, of course, but for our purposes here, I am adding specific measurements myself. Then you cut it into long strips about 2/3 inches wide and then across into 2-inch lengths. Finally, you cut little narrow strips about 1 inch long on the sides, pull along, and roll back each strip into a curlicue shape. Dip it in sugar and bake. Doña Felicia would tell you here that in Old Mexico, these cookies were also cut into heart and star shapes. And while they kneaded and baked, they all talked as if they were old comadres and laughed at the flour that got on their noses and the dough that somehow stuck itself into hair. And that was when Fe first really talked about her new and quickly serious romance. Why is it that I didn't know that my brother-in-law's son was back here? Fe shrugged her shoulders. Her concentration was on getting the dough to form a perfect curlicue. Her mother persisted. Didn't Casimiro like Phoenix? He was practically raised there. Are you two planning on moving back there together, Hita? Mom, we haven't discussed that far, Fe said, wiping her brow with the back of her sleeve since her hands were sticky with masa. Casey said, "Ha fall out, father, and did not to work for anymore, so decided to come here. He other family too, no?" "Yes, I know that," Sophia said. "And now that I think about it, your father was always considered the black sheep of the family, so I can see why they didn't keep in touch with us after Loca's funeral. It was nice that they showed up, at least my cuñada with a couple of her kids did, even if her husband didn't. Now I remember that little Casimiro was busying pinching you the whole time Father Jerome was giving his sermon. Do you remember, Fe?" Sophie was saying all this rather joyfully, because of course she was trying to be joyful about Fe's new relationship without thinking, and she said to La Loca, "Remember, Hita?" Loca did not answer, but instead put a cookie sheet with a batch of bizcochitos into the oven, and Fe gave her mother a hard nudge, moving her lips so that only her mother could get the message. Loca was dead then. "Remember, Mama?" Sophie got it, and immediately felt bad for having been so insensitive to her Hita Loca. "So how was it that he found you?" Sophia asked Fe. "Well, he came into bank one day, open, new account, and there I was. There he was. And rest history. We live happily after," Fe said. And if that been true.